Joe Biden is reportedly considering former Disney CEO Bob Iger for ambassador to China. This is a ridiculous idea. Here's why. As Hollywood's relationship with China has warmed, Bob Iger has been at the forefront of the movement to bring Hollywood closer to China. Why does Hollywood want to be closer to China? Because there's a huge market of moviegoers in the country who will eagerly consume American films made correctly. Now, Bob Iger is somebody who in the past has actually been a good example of why that relationship is extremely problematic, because it compromises Americans' abilities to stand up for human rights and to practice free speech against China, a country that is engaged in abuses of human rights on a scale that we're learning more and more about every single day. This is something that I wrote actually in October of 2019 about Bob Iger. Iger said that caution is imperative, that's a quote, when it comes to public criticism of China. This is when the Hong Kong protests were really starting to spread. And so Iger says, caution is imperative. And he essentially said the quiet part out loud and said, what we learned in the last week, this is as the NBA and China were going back and forth because of a tweet that had been posted in solidarity with Hong Kong from Daryl Morey, an NBA coach. Iger says, what we learned in the last week, we've learned how complicated this is. The biggest learning from that is that caution is imperative. To take a position that could harm our company in some form would be a big mistake. I just don't believe it's something we should engage in a public manner. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is everything that's wrong with Hollywood, and it is coming out of the mouth of one of Joe Biden's candidates for ambassador to China. Iger would not stand with those fighting for freedom in Hong Kong because he was afraid it would hurt his bottom line. And he said the same thing would apply. He's implying here that the same thing would apply to the NBA. Is it the biggest deal in the world if Bob Iger has an opinion publicly on this? No, but it shows exactly how people like Bob Iger who are saying he wouldn't film in Georgia where there are lucrative tax credits for filmmakers because of an abortion law passed in that state. He won't do that. But he won't criticize Chinese human rights abuses. It's disgusting hypocrisy, and it's indicative of a desire to have a friendlier than appropriate relationship with a nation that is engaged in gross human rights abuses, that is an enemy of the United States, and by the way, that censors preemptively, in so many cases, American films. Hollywood's increasing reliance on China has changed the movies that we watch here because they want to be able to show those films in China without making significant edits. They want them to work in both countries, and it changes what we see here. It changes what they make, even if they don't show that movie in China because they're afraid they'll be blacklisted, and all the while they are moralizing, they're moralizing and criticizing conservatives, and not just criticizing conservatives, often condescending and mocking. It's a really bad situation. And they're, by the way, making a lot of money through their compliance with the CCP's censors. They're making a lot of money on it. Now, Bob Iger, again, most people probably remember just recently when Mulan came out, which is a movie that was made under his watch. He stepped down recently as CEO of Disney. He flirted with a run for president, but after that movie came out, people noticed in the credits that in the province where we know the Uyghur Muslim population is being oppressed, that's where they filmed this Mulan movie, and in the credits to the movie, they thanked several of the government agencies. That might sound innocuous, but it's absolutely not. These are the agencies that are tasked with the repression of the Uyghurs. And so to have Disney slipping in there, granted Bob Iger is not CEO any longer of Disney, but to have them just sort of slip in there, thanks to the government, that means that they were working with the same agencies that are working to repress the Uyghur Muslims. Refusing to work with them, of course, would be incentive for China to stop. Hollywood has leverage. to pressure China out of these human rights abuses, to pressure them into stopping. And it's not just going to come from Hollywood alone, of course. This is a broader foreign policy issue, not just for America, but for the West. But Hollywood does have leverage. They could refuse to film in that province. They could speak out. They could prioritize human rights over their bottom line, but they don't. They don't. And that's not to say that the United States has to, and Hollywood has to cut off its entire relationship with China, because there may be some benefits that come with that. There may be the benefit of cultural exchange that makes China really, the Chinese people really friendly to America and reverent of America. That's all true. That's all possible. To what degree that exists is a very fair question. There's arguments for that, but that's not what's happening with people like Bob Iger. To name him U.S. ambassador to China would signal that Biden is exactly as tone deaf and uninterested in holding China, this power that is doing everything it can to topple the United States' dominance on the world stage, and to undercut our power. This country that's working actively to do that, while also suppressing its own people and engaging in crazy surveillance tactics of its own people. It's not just the Uyghurs, although that case is particularly chilling and upsetting and tragic. China is suppressing its people in myriad ways, all while it's doing everything it can to undercut the United States. So to send somebody like Bob Iger, who has prioritized his bottom line over holding China accountable, as our ambassador to that country, if Joe Biden does that, it's a very scary indication of where he stands on this issue. You can make the argument, of course, that Bob Iger is very well qualified to negotiate with the Chinese because he's done a lot of negotiating with the Chinese, but not in a good way. And that is scary. If Joe Biden goes with Bob Iger, it is an outrage. It is an outrage, and it should... It signals that his administration's stance towards China is not going to be the stance that this country needs. As always, like and subscribe and stay tuned for more.